Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Do we have a cure for COVID? Well, that's what doctors in Israel believe they may have found through an experimental drug. They also say they can supply the entire world with it in a matter of a few months.
So what is this new drug? How does it work? And why do doctors have such high hopes for it? Chris Mitchell brings us the good news from Jerusalem.
Sonia Cohen could one day be seen as a walking miracle.
I want to say thank you for everything. You saved my life. I was in a poor condition, and now I'm better.
Coming to the hospital with COVID-19, she was unable to breathe. She was placed in intensive care and needed oxygen. That's when Professor Nadir Arber came to her and asked if she would be part of a clinical trial for a new drug. Sonia said yes.
From the first dose of the trial drug, it's possible to say I felt a lot better. After 2 days, I got off the oxygen in stages and I could breathe. I could really breathe. I felt that I was between life and death. Thanks to God, and of course, thanks to the doctors.
Doctors at Ichilov Hospital believe they may have found a cure for the COVID-19 virus. They say just 5 doses from a little bottle could end the worldwide pandemic.
So this is a drug. It is very simple. You give it to patients with severe disease before they are going to deteriorate into very severe disease that mandate ventilations and even mortality.
Professor Arber is director of research on developing the anti-coronavirus drug EXO-CD24, a treatment derived from a cell line established from a child aborted decades ago.
We don't really treat the corona, we treated the endpoint. There is overreactions of the immune system. The immune system is acting furiously and mainly in the lung, releasing a lot of cytokines and chemokines that usually fight infections, but now they're destroying the lung tissue.
That's the point they intervene and administer their treatment, which Arber says interrupts the cytokine storm.
And we give it by inhalation. It's very simple. It takes 2 to 3 minutes per day, and you do it for 5 days. So we enrolled 30 patients in the phase 1. We checked for safety, and the drug was very safe, no side effects whatsoever.
All 30 patients in that phase 1 trial recovered.
And most of them went home after 3 to 5 days.
While Arber believes the vaccination push is important, he also feels this drug could have an even bigger impact if the remaining 2 phases of the important human trials are successful.
The biggest advantage of my drug, if it's effective, of course, is that I can produce it fast, efficient, and cheap. Within a few months, I can supply the entire world needs.
Arber recently briefed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the treatment's progress. Later, at a press conference with the visiting Greek Prime Minister, Netanyahu praised the results and reported Greek hospitals would join in the clinical trials.
If you're infected by corona and you're seriously ill and you have a lung problem, you take this, you inhale this with a saline solution, and you come out feeling good.
Arber says many more countries want to participate, and he believes this could be just the beginning.
And then it's going to be the platform for many other diseases with overreaction, like autoimmune disease, in the lung and the entire body.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, that's wonderful news coming out of Israel. Israel truly is fulfilling the promise that it will be a light to the nations. Wonderful inventions coming out of Israel. And the good news here is that even though the initial drug was developed with fetal cells, you can, now that it's proven, you don't have to use those fetal cells in order to make more doses of it, which is really, really good news. Here at home, more promising news in the fight against the coronavirus. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. President Biden says the country will have enough vaccines for 300 million Americans by summer's end. Not only that, people who've been vaccinated may not have to quarantine if they're exposed to the virus. CBN's Eric Phillips has the story.
The president is sounding quite hopeful because the U.S. is on track to exceed his goal of administering 100 million vaccine doses in his first 100 days in office. 26 million shots have already been given in his first 3 weeks. That's despite, he says, inheriting a pandemic without a plan. During a visit to the National Institutes of Health Thursday, the president announced the U.S. has secured commitments for 200 million more doses of the COVID-19 vaccine from Pfizer and Moderna to be delivered by the end of July. Biden also said 100 million doses that had been promised by June will now arrive in May.
That's a month faster. That means lives will be saved.
A grand total of 600 million doses for the U.S., with each American needing 2 shots.
That means we're now on track to have enough supply for 300 million Americans by the end of July. My predecessor, be very blunt about it, did not do his job in getting ready for the massive challenge of vaccinating hundreds of millions of Americans.
More promising news as Dr. Fauci says eligibility should soon open up to any American who wants to be vaccinated.
I would imagine by the time we get to April, that will be what I would call, for better wording, open season. Namely, virtually everybody and anybody in any category could start to get vaccinated.
The Biden administration has deployed active duty troops to help stand up vaccination sites in several states in anticipation of increased supply. But for now, frustration as people scramble to get inoculated amid what is still a vaccine crunch.
It's ridiculous. 30-degree weather. There were people in wheelchairs, walkers. This is ridiculous.
The current shortage forcing hard-hit LA to shut down a few vaccination sites for a few days as the California variant ricochets across the state and the country.
We don't have enough vaccines. Our vaccine supply is uneven, it's unpredictable, and too often inequitable.
Meanwhile, the CDC says once people have been fully vaccinated, they no longer have to quarantine if they are exposed to the COVID-19 virus. But officials caution that for now, they still should wear masks.
The bottom line is this: masks work, and they work best when they have a good fit and are worn correctly.
Where schools are concerned, the White House says it will follow new guidelines expected to come today from the CDC on when and how to reopen schools. This after critics say the president has been backing away from his pledge to open a majority of schools in his first 100 days in office. Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Thanks, Eric. Lawyers for former President Trump get their turn today after congressional impeachment managers finish making their case in the Senate impeachment trial. Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson tells us what to expect from the defense today.
President Trump's lawyers plan to argue Trump's speech on January 6 is protected by the First Amendment, and if they charge him, other lawmakers are guilty too.
I can give you Chuck Schumer's words when he stood in front of a mob in front of the Supreme Court and he said, "Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, you've unleashed the whirlwind and you will pay the price."
Republican Senator Rand Paul tells CBN News he doesn't believe Trump's speech incited the Capitol riot.
If we're going to judge political speech on the actual words, let's use one standard, and I think Democrats would find if they look in the mirror, they've been guilty of much more than they're accusing Trump of.
House impeachment managers spent 2 days making their case that President Trump's violent rhetoric led to the attack.
This was not a hidden crime. The president told them to be there, and so they actually believed they would face no punishment.
And argued once the attack started, he did nothing to stop it.
Why did President Trump not tell his supporters to stop the attack on the Capitol as soon as he learned of it? Why did President Trump do nothing to stop the attack for at least 2 hours after the attack began?
And showed no remorse.
People thought that what I said was totally appropriate.
GOP Senator Bill Cassidy told reporters Thursday he wants the defense to address Trump's actions once the siege began.
The president was calling to try and get more senators to decertify the election. Now, presumably, since we were at that point being evacuated, and I think he was told that, there was some awareness of the events. And so what I hope the defense does is explain that.
He also wants them to address Trump's repeated claims the election was stolen.
So when the point was made, people felt as if they had no recourse because their vote was being stolen. Well, the president built that story. So how do you defend that? How do you describe that? Because again, people will still be telling me that Dominion rigged the machines.
Even with GOP senators like Cassidy weighing a possible vote to convict, Senator Paul believes the prosecution is nowhere close to convincing the 17 Republicans needed to bar Trump from seeking federal office again.
So there'll be 44 or 45 people to acquit. It'll be a largely partisan exercise. It will have destroyed any possible unifying concept that President Biden may have wished for, but it was his own doing.
The defense is expected to only take 1 day to present their case, and the final vote on whether or not to convict could come as early as this weekend. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thank you, Abby. Gordon, back to you.
Well, I think the vote's already established, and we're already going to see an acquittal. They don't have enough votes to actually convict. So this is essentially a show trial, but it is being watched. The ratings for this are actually more than the ratings for the previous impeachment trial. So people are seeing new things and new videos being released. But still, at the end of the day, former President Trump will be acquitted.